Hey guys, Lumen02. I'm going to be doing some more 93-94 content. So I did some content yesterday. It was a little more ad hoc content, like, maybe not the best content I put out, but this is going to be a single game, and then I'm going to actually go into the deck. I've done this deck before. This is blue-red. So playing against DRT 5091. I'm just going to call him DRT. Are you trying to church it up, DRT? Just kidding, buddy. That's the first thing I think of when I see DRT, though. I think of that silly movie. Anyways, this is my opener in this game. Hand looks fine. It's a little bit land light. Now, you see a Loa. Loa is the most powerful card, probably singularly in the 93-94 format. Under EC rules, its power is curbed extensively, though, due to the fact that all decks can run up to 4 strip mines. I believe this deck I'm running runs 3, because it's also running 3 Mishra's Factories, but on the whole, it's a 23 land deck, and I believe this is actually technically a Grixis deck. It's splashing like one Underground Sea and like probably 2 to 3 Cities of Brass to run Demonic Tutor. It's not running Mind Twist though, so this hand's acceptable. We're on the draw, which means at a minimum we're going to be able to draw 1 card off Loa. So drop Loa, draw a card, play out the Mox Ruby because I'm hoping to kind of bolt this factory to kind of get some early LD. I'm not an LD deck, but I'm not one to give up on free LD. They have a strip mine though, and are able to get our Loa, but it's 2-for-1 advantage off them strip mining, and they're down to just 1 mana source in play, which seems pretty decent for me. Now they have Loa, so Wheel of Fortune, which had been my plan, has kind of gotten a lot worse. Factory's looking a little dubious because they do have red mana available. Now they have a factory, and red mana means they could have Bolt up. Draw Counterspell, not the best of draws here. I actually go ahead and just recall for 1, pitching, I believe, the Power Sink. No, just Counterspell. Counterspell is probably worse than Power Sink in this situation, but I get the Loa because I want to play Loa and then wheel. So they're trying to build back up to lower range, so I just punch. I try to not let them get into lower range. I mean, I played a variance here too, so give us both 7-card hands. They discard their whole hand. Unfortunately, the hands do not pair off well, so you'll see tragedy kind of strikes. They drew into Strip Mine, which, we did not, which with them in a Loa in play and not drawing a Strip Mine, we're probably in some trouble here considering ours just got blown up. Again, it was 2-for-1 advantage initially because I was able to draw a card off of it in response to their Strip Mine. They counter my Shatter. The reason I did that is I want to resolve a threat. Now, when you're behind on cards, or when you do not have the onboard card engine, like Loa, I think you need to push tempo as hard as you can and try to end the game quickly, so you can accrue virtual advantage, i.e. not allow them to draw the bazillion cards that Loa is going to allow them to draw if I don't draw into a strip mine. Right now, we're looking, our hand's not great. We're looking for a situation to try to set up a bunch of Psionic Blasts and just tempo them out, possibly get them to tap out, on their EOT, so we can attack with Factory and get a little bit of virtual, or get a little bit of damage in and try to up the clock. They have 2 factories now, which is not great. It means our factory's not getting in. Then we draw into Geyser, so my plans kind of changed. Now I want to try to cause a fight on their EOT to get them to counter my burn spells, because I want to make them think that they're dead, possibly, because 12 is not low. It's not high. It's pretty low in this format, so we'll try to burn. And then on my following turn, I can resolve the Geyser. So I draw a Bolt, which is kind of exactly what I need to enact this plan. So I'm playing from behind it. I have 6 cards in hand. They have 8, but Loa means that the long game is going to go to them because they've seen just too many cards. So I go ahead and counterspell this, hoping they'll fight. They don't fight it, though. I plan on just going for a guy. So when they don't counter it, I just say, hey, I'm just going to wait and see what they do on the next turn. I didn't have enough mana to do all 3 Psionic Blasts on their EOT plus the Bolt. I kind of want to just throw all of it at them and make them think they're dead so they waste their counter spells on it. When I see them fire up the factories, I'm either really happy or really sad. Now, if they went in a little bit hasty, that means they, now they have 4 less mana to protect themselves on their EOT, or it also means their hand's just stacked, which I could believe either. They go ahead and counterspell the Bolt, fearing an additional Bolt, I assume. I just go ahead and play out all of my cards. They know exactly that, this is my last card. I could try to, play some mind games and pretend I have a counterspell. I don't. I'm leaving enough mana up to actually kill them, possibly with cards I could draw, but they have another counterspell, which is unfortunate. I fire up Factory to try to attack. They actually bolt. I don't really like bolting here. I guess it's not horrible. It depends on what they have in hand. If they can kill me this turn, which it appears they can, then it makes perfect sense. They recall. To get back 2 bolts, they ditch 2 Blood Moons. So their deck is very highly tacked against blue decks. They have... this deck appears to be a deck that just kills the deck. I don't know how much DRT5091 knows of me. Most folks who I think have played me, at least digitally, have probably played against me piloting the variants of the deck once or twice. Blue Red Moon is kind of like the answer deck to that deck. Blood Moon in general is pretty solid in this format. There's not a lot of decks that can run it freely because most decks play a bunch of colors. There's a couple like just straight up only mountains decks. I think there's like a really bad Sly deck. There's a pretty good Atog deck, and then there's a Gobos deck, a Goblins deck that's okay-ish. But Moon is probably the premier Blood Moon deck. This UR Counterburn deck is probably the premier Blood Moon deck. In this matchup, though, since we're in the mirror, and I chose deliberately not to play the deck, I try to not always play the deck because folks will, sometimes folks will template against me and just like play a deck that's good versus it. Which Blue Red it tends to be, and Blue Red, is actually just a solid deck in its own right. That's kind of why I chose to play Blue Red myself because I still wanted to play Blue because when you're playing 93-94, I feel like in general. There's the blue decks and there's everything else. Like, they don't call it the power blue cards in 93-94 for nothing. Brain Geyser Recall, Ancestral Recall. I'm sorry, Recall. If you're not someone who's played me a bunch or watched Old School, for Old School people, they're going to know exactly what I mean when I say it. Because sometimes folks in other formats will call Ancestral Recall. I always get confused by that because I am used to seeing this Recall. Where are you at, buddy? I thought they cast it. Didn't they cast Recall? Do I have one in my yard? I do not. We go to the next game. I think I end up seeing one, so we'll end up pulling it up. Oh, actually, no, I used it this game. So here's Recall. Like, when people say Recall and they mean Ancestral Recall, it always confuses me because there's this card. This card is not playable in pretty much any format other than 93-94, but it's very good in this format because the power level of card draw and mana in this format is very high. Recall is kind of like regrowth on steroids in this format. When you get to the late game and you have a large hand size, you can discard irrelevant cards, specifically in control decks where your cards are much more situational, to get back relevant stuff. And, when you do this for like 4, it's just game breaking. Card's very powerful in this format. That's one of the power blue cards. Try to think of some other ones that are really, maybe not on power blue level, but are just also very. I mean, you have Time Twister as well, which is just, that's a haymaker in this format where the card power level is very high. The creatures kind of stink, but, the cards themselves, the spells and the mana are just busted. So being able to Time Twister, sometimes you just don't even feel the pain of it because you have so much mana available to you. But anyways, we lose this game, and it's not really a surprise. Loa, like I said, is probably the most singularly powerful card in this format, probably more so than Ancestral Recall and Black Lotus. And it's funny, I was actually talking to someone about the card Search for Escanta and Control Mirrors in Highlander, and it's kind of the same thing. Like, it's better than Library of Alexandria in the long game, but Loa, starts on turn 1, especially on the draw, and it just keeps going. And these blue mirrors, it's game breaking. And unfortunately, we kind of wheeled our opponent into a better hand than we got. I do think we had to take that choice, or we had to take that option. I could have hoped to high roll a threat draw, but they were 1 turn off from getting back to 7 and just drawing with Loa naturally. It was possibly correct to wait and see if I drew a strip mine on the following turn. Now, as we know, we would not have because Wheel of Fortune doesn't shuffle your library; you just draw what's on top. So that would have ended up working out, and it's possible they would have had Counterspell up on the following turn, and then we would have just been stuck at less cards, in hand as far as potentials go, with them on a draw engine. So I kind of like how we played it, but, we got beat up by Loa and ended up losing this first one and go into Game 2. So quick pause, guys, and I'll be right back for the next game in this match set. Alrighty, guys, we are back. Let me close that down. This hand's not great, but it's fine. It's kind of a bread and butter hand. It's got a Reb, which can deal with, a lot of their spells. It's got a Strip Mine in case they keep a greedier one, or they keep one that is based on the power of Loa. I am pretty much going to auto-blow up this Loa. I get very lucky and draw into a power blue card, Ancestral Recall. I am going to get my damage in here, because this deck is kind of an aggro control deck. It definitely does not want to sit around all day. Its cards don't all grow more cards like, the deck does, where you have, like, Jame Day Tomes and Disrupting Scepters. It has Bolts and Chain Lightnings and stuff like that. So I'm pretty happy with this draw. I throw in a Time Walk, get rebbed, and then use the remaining mana off Soul Ring to play out Serendib Freak to put a clock on them. Now, they're at 2 mana to my, 5 here, and I have a threat on board. They go ahead, I believe, resolve their own Serendib Freak. I could be greedy and try to, get this Reb on their turn to get 1 damage in, but I'd rather obviously get 3 in here, and I still have Counterspell available. The one risk this play does run is if they do draw into a Strip Mine, they can Strip Mine me off of Counterspell, which now I'm trying to leave up on their turn. Luckily for us, they do have the Strip Mine, but they don't have a relevant card that they deem as worthy of playing here. So I get my land down. I actually don't opt to attack with Factory because they're just going to block with their factory, which factory, taps to make itself a 3/3. They do blow up my ring. They could have blown up my factory as well, and that would have been good value, so they can save Strip Mine. They do play a Psionic Blast here. I'm willing to counter this because I have onboard advantage, and it, I think, behooves me to stay ahead. I want to force their play on the Strip Mine here, so I end up activating my own factory and attacking with both cards. They go ahead and blow it up. Now, I could put another Serendip Freak down, but I actually opt not to. I want to leave up a counter spell here. Just in case they have like a Serendip Jin or something. Not that card is per se great in this spot, but I already have lethal on the next turn with Chain Lightning, and now I can attack. If this damage happens, then they're down to 2. I can cast Chain Lightning. I can fight through 2 counter spells, which is actually exactly what they have. So they have Counter Spell, which I counter spell, and they have Flash Counter. I've seen this card a lot more recently. I don't know if it's become more popular. Flash Counter is a good card, but I tend to like it more in combo decks as opposed to like aggro control decks. I also like the old art better, but that's not on them. That's on Moto. I've been seeing it a lot more, and I don't think it's always correct. I sometimes feel like you tend to overboard when you have Flash Counter in your sideboard because you see a bunch of blue cards and counter spells, and you're like, oh, I'll bring Flash Counter in. But at the end of the day, that does actually decrease your threat density. Now, my boarding plan was very simple in this matchup. I brought in all of my Rebs, so I have 4 Rebs, and I didn't have any Rebs to start off with. They're already hot-teched with at least 1 Reb, maybe 2 in their main deck. Plus the moons. So their deck's already kind of techy. Bringing in Flash Counter I don't think makes it better. I think you're just better off having more... I think you're better off, not diluting the deck of, actual threat density. That's just me, though. I am not a huge fan of this card in more fair decks. I consider that both the decks we're playing, we're kind of in the mirror match. I consider them pretty fair decks. Now, where I do like cards like Flash Counters and, TV Combo, I don't mind it there. And actually, that deck should be running, probably 2 copies of it in the sideboard. Power Monolith is not bad in, but decks that are combo decks or combo control decks, our aggro combo decks, I actually don't mind this card in Dreams either, 4 or 5 color Dreams. It's an easy to cast counter spell that actually does get Disenchant, which is actually really relevant for Flash Counter. The fact that it can counter Disenchant I think is huge, and that's kind of the card I tend to template Flash Counter against is Disenchant because it's a harder card to counter. You can't Reb it. Which, Reb is obviously the better card against counter magic over Flash Counter, but if you're capped down at Rebs, I tend to feel like you want Flash Counter specifically against white spells in the format. So I'm not really a huge fan of it in the sideboard, but, to each their own, and they may have had great success with it, or maybe someone else has had great success with it recently, and I'm just misevaluating the card as far as its utility as a sideboard slot in blue-red, but I oftentimes feel like it doesn't really do enough in that deck. It's really, I'm not saying it's not a playable card, I just think you really want to template it against decks that have good white cards, good unrestricted white cards, that you need to stop to enact a combo, i.e. don't get your Monolith disenchanted in response to Power Artifact, don't get your Underworld Dreams disenchanted, in response to a Wheel Effect or Winds of Change. Same could be actually said for TV Combo, but TV Combo is kind of more of a niche deck. You don't really see that deck ever played in bigger tournaments. I have played a lot of that deck, and actually I think that deck's pretty good. I like that deck a lot. I do think it probably wants 2 copies of Flash Counter. I don't know what they would go in over. I'd really have to relook the board. I actually, not recently, but maybe 3 or 4 months ago, changed that sideboard up to have a couple disenchants in it to stop Dreams, because Dreams just generally kills that deck. And stop stuff like Winter Orb. Winter Orb's a problematic card as well because you can take all the turns you want, but if there's a Winter Orb in play, it's not really the same as taking all the turns. Anyways, guys, so we end up getting them in game 2. Kind of get them a little bit choked on mana off an early Loa draw. That's one thing, in under European rules, having a turn 1 Loa, generally you can keep excuse the language, you can keep shitty hands with Loa and just still win games in Blue Mirrors. If you have a Loa in your opener, because there's only a couple cards that template well against Loa, basically Chaos Orb, which you don't get online, Strip Mine, which there's a Miser of or singleton copy of under the European rules. I'm trying to think of what else gets it. Yeah, that's really it. I mean, yeah, I can't think of. I mean, I guess you could animate it with Living Plane and blow it up with a Prodigal Sorcerer or some crazy shit. But anyways, Loa is very powerful, much more powerful under the European rules. Under EC rules, I think oftentimes you need to, it's not the 0% that you keep like a slightly worse hand that has Loa, but you definitely want to have follow-up land plays that provide colored mana when you're playing Loa under EC rules, because its chance of getting mined are pretty high with 4 of them in each. Well, not each deck, but 4 of them in most decks. All right, guys. So got the tempo advantage here. Managed to close the game out relatively quickly. By turn 8. Turn 8's not bad, but there was a lot of good like interchange of cards and some decent gameplay here before we managed to get there. So let's go on to the next game here. All right, guys, we are back. Again, this is just kind of an average hand. It has a strip mine to kind of like maybe choke them on mana. It's got 2 removal spells for Serendib Efreet. It's got a Time Walk. The Time Walk's kind of bad in this opener because like I don't really want to use Time Walk early as an explorer. I'd prefer to use Time Walk in conjunction with a draw 7 or with resolution of a threat like Serendib Efreet, so I can get a free attack off of it and possibly leave up counter magic after having resolved it and gotten lightning bolt damage off of it. They do have Loa again, so Loa is generally really spooky in the beginning, but again, we have the strip mine. I do play out the Ruby here to leave up the Reb, just in case they have Ancestral Recall as a follow-up, which is the most problematic card. They play on a Soul Ring. I draw into a Bolt, just play out my land. I do not Time Walk here, because I think Time Walking here is kind of just a waste of the card. It's a free roll, but they're out of lands now, so it appears that they were, hoping to use Loa at least for a couple turns to try to sculpt their hand and get the mana they need to really get after me. I draw into a Brain Geyser, which is a great pull, so now I'm kind of looking to try to get them, they're already low on mana. I'm looking to kind of get them tied up so that I don't have to worry about a Red Elemental Blast, which is what they're representing with the Volcanic Island. So I do counter the Time Walk. I do draw to a Strip Mine, but I'm not going to strip this turn, which is possibly a mistake, because how I get punished here by not stripping, is that they just untap next turn and cast Ancestral Recall. That's the worst thing that could happen, and it does, of course, because it always happens. And they have Lotus as well, so they cast a Brain Geyser of their own looking for lands. They must get really unfortunate here because they don't find a land drop. I go ahead and strip mine them off of land, resolve the Serendib Efreet, cast my Time Walk, which I've been sacking since the beginning, to set up Serendib Efreet, plus untap with multiple counter spells in hand, draw another island, which allows me to leave up 2 counter spells on their turn. I go ahead and Chain Lightning them and Lightning Bolt them, just to up the clock a little bit, smack in for 3, get them down to 11. I have Psionic Blast for 4 damage, putting them down to 7. They're basically on a 3-turn clock right now, but probably faster, and I have 2 counter spells to kind of back up this line of play. They just go ahead and pack it in. So, they kept I wouldn't say a greedier one, but they kept one that was likely acceptable with Library of Alexandria. But, unfortunately, due to variance of their top deck, due to the fact that we had Strip Mine, and due to the fact that the variance of their top deck did not support them with land drops, we were able to get ahead relatively fast, and just kind of, cement that into a victory. That said, they had a lot of powerful cards. I mean, we had Time Walk, Ancestral, Black Lotus. They had a lot of power blue and restricted cards in the format. Brain Geyser. So a lot of powerful things happen on their end. But I do think one of the frailties of running, like I was saying, kind of an overly techy list, or a more teched out list, or possibly even over sideboarding. But I'm not going to say that for sure. Is that you end up drawing cards like Flash Counter and Beb and Shatter, and none of these, these are all pretty decent cards in the matchup, but they don't win the game. So if you're behind, they can help try to keep you in the game so you can draw more cards. But they don't close the game out. So what are you taking out to play them, right, is the kind of the question. And if it's more ways that you actually win the game, proactively win the game, then I think oftentimes it's almost a folly to put cards like that in. I tend to lightly sideboard. I tend to like more lightly sideboarding my decks. And the reason that is just because, I've designed my decks to win in a very specific way. And when I cut too much out of the core of that deck to have more options that are just good against my opponent or strong against my opponent, I oftentimes find that I give them just about as much advantage by not proactively killing them, because they get more draw steps right, as I do, match win percent points for myself. So I think there's a really happy medium, and when I see cards like Flash Counter, I think they're very powerful. But again, I think they're very specific to a sideboard card for some very specific decks, mostly aggressive combo decks, or possibly combo control decks, but probably aggressive combo decks. That are looking to just, win by, turn 3 or 4. Which is a few of in the format. It's mostly 5-color Dreams, Power Monolith. I suppose Lich's Ball, but no one plays that. I've played it once. I built it and played it once. And then TV Combo, but no one also plays that. There's really, the premier combo deck's probably 5-color Dreams, or Power Monolith, but... And those are the decks that I could see playing Flash Counter. I just don't think that in blue-red or in versions of the deck, I think there's better options. you get to a point where like you have too many counters, and there's no pitch counters in this format, so the risk of losing mana advantage and then having these cards in your hand is really bad. Whereas if like it was a card like Force of Will, like if you have mana disadvantage or if you're behind on mana, you can still cast Force of Will. It's not great, but it keeps you from dying, but you can still cast it. Whereas like this is just a brick. Like if you get behind on mana or you're behind on board, these cards don't do much. Like they just they keep you where you're at. And if your opponent's ahead, being behind, keeping you behind is really not that great. That's kind of just my take on some of the card choice we get to see here. I'm definitely glad I played blue-red against my opponent. I do think they I don't know if they teched me and jumped into this list or if they just like playing blue-red, but I tend to play versions of the deck, and their deck looks very good against the deck. Efficient burn, efficient counter magic, and land hate tends to be really good against the deck. But in the blue-red mirror, we had some pretty cool games here, some pretty fun ones. This last game was kind of a nombo, but the first game I think you kind of got to see the avalanching advantage of Library of Alexandria and some of the forced plays I think we had to take there to play around it. It didn't pan out, but I think we played that game okay. I think we played well. And then these last two games, you kind of got to see the other half of like Loa, where it's kind of risky just due to the increased volume of strip mines in the format, and sometimes can leave you stranded with a hand that may not be optimal, given the remainder of the cards and, the hope that you had invested in Loa to draw you, power you through cards off the top of your deck. Anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed it. This is a really cool blue-red deck. I will pull up the list momentarily. Give me a quick second. I'm going to pause it, guys. I'll pull up the list real quick, and we can look at that real quick, and I'll just run you through my build. Alrighty, guys, back. So I am running, like I said, like one black card. I'm running Demonic Tutor. Generally speaking, it finds Control Magic, Brain Geyser, Recall, Ancestral Recall. Those tend to be the common finds, or Draw 7. Is often what it finds. Sometimes Fireball, but I just need to damage him out. Alright, so mana base is pretty simple. It's got 2 Cities of Brass that help, enable casting of Demonic Tutor. It's got a Loa like most decks do, most blue decks especially. It's got Boatload of Islands, Boatload of Mountains, 3 Strip Mines, 3 Mishra's Factories, 1 Underground Sea to help fix again for the DT, and then 4 Volks. And then Black Lotus, Mox Ruby, and Sapphire. No Jet in this deck, for the 1 black card. This is a very high mana count deck. I think it could go down to 22. And actually, it's not uncommon that I'll actually sideboard out the DT. Like in this game, I actually sideboarded out Demonic Tutor and Underground Sea to go down to 22 lands. To bring in some more efficient counter magic. I brought in 4 Rebs. So I took out DT, took out Underground Sea, I believe took out the Serendip Jin. I took out. I don't like it in this matchup. Especially with Rebs. I think I took out Control Magic, so he just gets Reb too easily as well. So I just made the deck more efficient and cut 1 land, and then those 2 kind of clunkier cards out of the build when I was playing that last game. So anyways, this is the deck. It's very simple. It is running a lot of lands. Now, this looks like a very heavy land count for a Lightning Bolt, basically a burn deck. It's running Psionic Blast, 3/4s, a bunch of burn spells. But it kind of has to be. So that's one of the realities you live in when you're playing a strip mine format. I know there's folks on the fence about the card strip mine. Like some folks want it to be restricted, some folks don't. I know Steve Menendian's an outspoken person when it comes to the restriction of strip mine under EC rules. I wholeheartedly disagree. I like having strip mine in the format. Not that I enjoy just goozling folks with strip mine. I guess it can be fun sometimes, but realistically, what it comes down to is just the variance of this card right here, Library of Alexandria. And I got it. It's a miser copy, but that is why it kind of just is miserable to play against. Now, if you're playing and your opponent just puts this down on turn 1 on the draw, and you're in a blue mirror, you basically just lost the game. The game's over. And that's kind of why I like having strip mine as a 4 in the format, because there's not a ton of great ways to deal with Loa unless you're in black and have Blight / Sinkhole and 1 strip mine. That does it, but in general, most folks are not playing double black spells, and if they are, they're in a fairly specific deck. I've seen Hymn to Turret played in Esper Control. I've seen Blight played as well, not as commonly played. But that said, there's not a ton of decks that, if they only had 1 strip mine, can deal with this thing on turn 1 on a regular basis. Now, you could say, the probability of having your strip mine and the probability of your opponent having the Library of Alexandria are almost identical. That's true. How often does that come up, though? The probability of both happening is very unlikely. And, what I would offer you or proffer this is it the same in any format, having Vandal Blast in your opening hand and having Soul Ring in your opening hand? Which would you rather have? I would much rather have Soul Ring every single time because the probability or the possibilities that are offered by mana or the economy of the game is much more powerful than a singular answer card that is specific or templated against a specific card, right? Like, it's just worse. So I think Loa in general, maybe less powerful in a lot of other formats that are just quicker, but this format's not in general that quick. It does have some faster decks. It does have some very fast combo decks, but if the game goes long, and you're in a blue mirror, like, Loa just ends games because it increases your possibilities. Like, you drawing 2 a turn. And that is busted. That's why you'll see cards like Jame Day Tome played in this format, and I believe I may even have one on my sideboard. That said, we're running 23 lands for a very good reason. It could probably be 22, but I'm teching a few lands in here just to help with Demonic Tutor. 22, honestly, it's crazy, but like 24 mana sources is generally like the industry standard, or maybe even more. Like, this deck's running 26 right now. For this format because you have strip mines. So, like, you have to play around strip mines. One difference you'll see kind of like as you go in this format, like, I think more experienced players will tend to hold their strip mines for longer to get after utility lands like Mishra's Factory. I guess Tabernacle of Pendrell Vale is a thing. Maze of Ith is a thing. Loa is definitely a big thing. And the other half to these is that when your opponent does go to tap out, if you're the control mirror, for a threat, then you can generally use strip mine to take them off of counter magic on your turn, depending on what mana they're able to leave or open. And if they don't, they play intelligently around the use of strip mine to buy virtual advantage on the following turn by making cards in your hand dead, i.e. they can't cast their counter spells and you can resolve your stuff. Then you bought a turn, right? You bought an extra draw step in a whole turn, which is still good. So what is the general theory of play of this deck? Well, you got to see it play out already, so I'm not going to go too in-depth about that, but basically, it's got a bunch of burn, which can be used for removal in certain matchups, like against like White Weenie, or it can just be used to go to face and kill them relatively quickly. Its actual permanent-based threat suite's pretty small. It only has the 4 Serendip Efreets, the 1 Serendip Jin, which I send to sideboard a lot, because it's really if I feel like this card can get rebbed, I'm not going to play this card. It also has the Mishra's Factories. Has this Fireball as a threat, and then basically just the most efficient counter magic. So it's got, the 4 counter spells, the Mana Drain, it's got 2 Shatters, because artifacts are really important to this format. And it's got 4 Psionic Blast, Time Twister, Wheel of Fortune for card draw, as well as Recall for recursion, Brain Geyser for draw, 1 additional Power Sink. I like to play 1 Power Sink kind of as a miser copy. You can generally get them to tap out, or if they do have to tap out on their EOT, generally speaking, it means you're going to win the game. 1 Time Walk. It's not at its best in this deck. I think it tends to be like at its best in like in rug decks, or decks that have a lot of little creatures in it. This deck, does not die completely to City in a Bottle, but it's not really a great card for this deck to see. So as you get into the sideboard, but I'm running, a couple Bebs against like the really aggressive red decks. I tend to think Beb's good. I actually did not sideboard any Bebs against my opponent in the blue-red mirror. I just don't think it's good enough. Energy Flux against copies of the deck. Energy Flux is just a game breaker. It makes their Jame Day Tomes have upkeep. All of their nonsense artifacts. Their artifacts are kind of the way that they get out of like Blood Moon Lock, and I am running a Blood Moon in the sideboard, but I'm not running a main. I tend to like to have as few dead cards as possible in my main decks, especially with a deck like this, where I think this deck is actually really proactive. Like, it really wants to just get them dead quick. Now, I do have Control Magic, so against creatureless decks, Control Magic's pretty bad, but it's a pitch card for recall. Artifact Blast. So the reason I'm running Artifact Blast of all things in this deck, as opposed to more copies of Shatter or more copies of Shatter Storm, is because Artifact Blast is 1 cheaper, and 2, it actually can get City in a Bottle on the stack, which means you can keep your your Serendip Efreets, your Serendip Jins, and your Cities of Brass alive for a little bit longer. Because if the City of Brass or a City in a Bottle does resolve, then generally speaking, like, they're doing it to like kill 1 to 2 things, which may be like a City of Brass and like 1 Serendip Efreet, but it really douses your clock. Then you're looking to try to win with like Mishra's Factories and just burn. And you got to shatter it, but like shattering it's kind of like it's already defeating the purpose. Like, I mean, if it kills 2 things, it already did its job when it resolves. If you're not familiar with City in a Bottle, let me pull it up real fast. It's a weird card, so for the 93-94 players, bear with me. But I do have some viewers that aren't as familiar with this format. This is a weirdo card. It's City in a Bottle. It says basically whenever a non-token permanent with a name originally printed in the Arabian Nights expansion is put on the battlefield, its controller sacrifices it. Players can't cast spells or play lands with a name originally printed in the Arabian Nights expansion. That does not count for basic mountains. If you're not familiar, mountains were mistakenly printed in Arabian Nights, and they're pretty cool. They're actually sought after lands, but they just look like a basic mountain out of the ABU set. So City in a Bottle is actually a really powerful effect in this format. Now, Arabian Nights, for those that are not familiar, had some of the most aggressive creature cards in all of 93-94. You have like stuff like Curd Ape, Flying Men, Stone Throwing Devils see some play. That's actually not a moto. Stone Throwing Devils is a one black mana 1/1 first striker. It has cool art too. And then like the Afrits and Jin. So you have Serendip Afrit, Serendip Jin. Juzam Jin, Urnum Jin, like there's just a ton of cards that were If Bifafreet. There's a lot of cards that were printed in Arabian Nights that saw reprint in Revised and Onward, but City in a Bottle gets. So this card tends to be really relevant to halt aggressive decks. Curd Ape's another big one. I don't know if I said that one already, but there's just a ton of cards that were printed in Arabian Nights that this card actually is good enough that it sees play in this format. Generally not as a main deckable card unless you're running Transmute Artifact, but oftentimes a sideboard option against decks that are running a lower threat density or want to be able to deal with Serendip Jin. Additionally, City in a Bottle is another way to deal with Library of Alexandria, which was also originally come on card reader, which is originally printed in Arabian Nights, as well as City of Brass, which is the only rainbow land in the format. So that's kind of just one small aside on why I would play a card like Artifact Blast. I think being able to get a card like City in a Bottle on the stack is advantageous in certain situations if I believe my opponent to be playing it. I'm also playing 4 Red Elemental Blast. This card is pretty ubiquitous with cards or with decks that can run red, because blue just tends to be the most busted. Well, probably in every format, but definitely in this format. Additional Shatter, just some decks I want to have it against. Shatterstorm. There are definitely Tron and Shops lists in this format. I don't tend to think they're as good as they are in later formats where just more artifacts were printed that are just better at killing people fast, but Shatterstorm is good enough that having a single copy of it's not bad. I've debated running a copy of Earthquake in the sideboard as well, but it kind of goes in and out. Right now the deck's running a Tormod's Crypt, which may or may not be wrong, but against certain decks Tormod's Crypt is a showstopper. Against the Machine, Reanimator style decks. And Machine, so just to sorry, I'm going to use some terms that old school players are going to instantly know, and then some that my newer viewers may not. The Machine refers to a deck that used Hell's Caretaker and Triskelion to loop damage on the opponent, which is a really slow combo. But let me pull these cards up. Hell's Care. Let's see if I have this card. I do. So here's Hell's Caretaker. Oh, it was printed in M25. So basically, sacrifice a creature, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate this ability only during your upkeep. So it's a weird Legends card. This is not the original art. But the way this works with Triskelion is you ping them for 2, basically do shock damage. Then you have Triskelion ping itself, or you just have it do 3 to them if you have another Triskelion in the yard. Because you need to have 1 Trike in yard, right? So the first Trike, normally you do 2 to them, ping itself, and it goes to the yard. If you have another Trike, you play the other Trike, ping them for 3, and then exchange that Trike with the Trike in your yard, and then get the other Trike out, ping for 3, change that Trike into the Trike in the yard, and then basically you just have Bolt recursion every turn. It's a really bad, Hammer of Bogarten, burn recursion. But it's actually pretty good in this format. It's not bad. Now given it's predicated on you trying to use a 1/1 4-drop to kind of get the combo to work, which is very disruptible by Bolt, Chain Lightning, you name it, Psionic Blast, hell, even Psychic Purge kills it. But it's actually not a bad combo. It's pretty sweet. But that's the Machine. So that's kind of why I have Tormod's Crypt, because there are some Graveyard Matters decks. There's also a deck that I was playing more of a while ago. Actually, well, here's the thing. Tormod's Crypt is also just good against decks that want to use Time Twister, because you can get really relevant cards out of their deck, or make it so they can't continue to recurse their most powerful cards. If you see a Recall on the stack, targeting stuff, and you have an onboard Tormod's Crypt, it's a really good day. I mean, given if your opponent's doing that, they've gone to crazy town unless they're really trying to force you to use the Tormod's Crypt. But I am running a copy of that. I think, in general, you'd probably be happier just running 1 Earthquake over Tormod's Crypt. There's not a ton of graveyard decks, but there are some good ones. There is also just an All Hallows Eve. All Hallows. That has an apostrophe on it. Let's just do All Hallow. There is an All Hallows Eve Reanimator deck that uses Bazaar of Baghdad in this format, which is really sick. Now, there's no Ice Age, so you don't get Ashen Ghoul, but you have Nether Shadow. Sometimes that sees play, but more often than not, you just have big stupid stuff like Deep Spawn, Nicol Bolas, the original Elder Dragon, Triskelions, Tetravi. But here's All Hallows Eve. Basically, it is it's kind of like Living Death. Well, it's kind of like Living End, except it doesn't kill all the creatures on the board. It just brings all the ones from the graveyards back, and it is a unilateral effect. But when you're using Bazaar of Baghdad, just basically mill yourself, and you're throwing a bunch of fatties, or at least fatties that were good in this time frame into the yard, it tends to be pretty strong. That's another deck, though. I've actually done a deck tech on that, so if you're interested in seeing Reanimator or like any of these decks I'm talking about, I've probably done a little bit of coverage on all of them. Not a ton on some of them, but a little bit on all of them. Anyways, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed the 93-94 content. Like I said, I was a little more inspired to jump in and do some more content, and I got to play a game today, kind of a cool matchup in the Blue-Red Mirror, which I think is, generally speaking, a fun game. Is this the most tuned Blue-Red list? No, it's a little dated. It's probably a land over. The sideboard probably needs some reworking, but it's not a bad list either. I mean, you could definitely play some good games of Magic with it, and I think it's got enough going on that generally speaking, you should have pretty match neutral status against almost any deck in the format. You should be able to play your way out of it unless you mow into oblivion. On the whole, I think one of the strongest archetypes in 93-94 as well. Blue-red, I think, is not the strongest. I think the deck is still like the most powerful deck. But that said, there are decks like Blue-red burn that just beat the deck. I do think you give up a little bit of match win percentage points against other things that are in the format over the deck. But yeah, very, very solid deck, and I hope you guys enjoyed the content. And I'll look to try to provide more with new decks, in the future, but you know how it is. It's 93-94. There's not new cards getting printed for it, so the range of new decks that are viable are very few. You get stuff like Lich's Ball when I start brewing just new stuff that I haven't done yet. So anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed the gameplay and the very hasty deck tech here and kind of talking on templating with the sideboard. Alright, guys, enjoy, and take care now.